Over the past several months, we have seen riots across this country. I'm sure you've noticed. But they evolved well beyond just some outrage over a man losing his life and became something totally different. Now we're seeing in Chicago, in Salt Lake City, in Atlanta, in DC, in Seattle, and Portland, violent uprisings where people try to destroy statues, or most notably in Portland, try to breach a federal courthouse, where apparently they've done so. According to Robert Evans, a reporter for Bellingcat, he says, "Tonight, the citizens of Portland, a mix of moms and dads and black bloc and activists of all stripes, tore open the doors of a federal courthouse and then beat back the agents inside." To put it simply, far-left insurrectionists, extremists, rioters, whatever you want to call them, actually breached a federal courthouse and attacked federal law enforcement. Where are the local police to stop this? Well, they've stood down. At what point do we call this a civil war? You have the Attorney General of Oregon suing the federal government. You have Nancy Pelosi attacking on Twitter the federal law enforcement who have just been attacked inside their own courthouse. And now we have a GOP lawmaker comparing the insurrectionists to those who started the Civil War, comparing what happened in Portland to the attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina, which literally started the first Civil War. Now, a lot of people are very reluctant to say Civil War because I think the reason is if all of this dies down, everyone will say, of course, it wasn't a civil war. It was some kind of uprising. But if this escalates into a full-on hot war with, say, live ammo, then of course this is part of the Civil War. So, well, it's hard to determine what's happening when you're living in the history. But I assure you, if this escalates 50 years from now, they will say this was well into the Civil War and perhaps going back even further than the beginning of the George Floyd riots. I want to walk you through some of the history of what's been going on with the discussion of the Civil War, of a second Civil War. And I know a lot of people might roll their eyes, but I implore you to take this seriously. The conversations around a cold Civil War, a second Civil War, and now a hot Civil War have been going on for years. I know because I've been highlighting these articles and talking about them when experts emerge. A Princeton professor, for instance, last year saying we're in a cold Civil War. There was a financier from Russia who a couple of years ago said that the United States is experiencing a second Civil War. And now, quite literally, you have 54 days of an attack on a federal building. Now, of course, they're not using live ammo yet. Photos are emerging showing federal law enforcement brandishing what appears to be weapons that fire live ammunition. And many people have started to speculate as to what happens next. The weapons being used by the far left are in fact lethal, but they're just not that powerful. They're using commercial grade fireworks and other blunt objects. Federal law enforcement may at some point be forced to defend themselves, and perhaps that's when people will say, there was our shot heard around the world. Maybe we're not there yet, okay? But the rhetoric certainly is. And so now what I see is a GOP lawmaker saying that side are the insurrectionists. I see a Democratic lawmaker saying Trump's federal officers are stormtroopers. And now Donald Trump has entertained the possibility of sending more federal agents to various federal buildings to protect them throughout the United States, notably in Chicago, where apparently 150 federal agents will be deployed. From this, the New York Times has published an op-ed saying this, or asking, can we call it fascism yet? Basically saying it is. When the highest level rhetoric is split down the middle from our lawmakers, it stands to reason it's here, man. Or at the very least, the dominoes are falling over, and I don't see any way to stop it. But let's start breaking down the news. I want to show you this first story. Before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's many ways you can give. The best thing you can do is actually subscribe to this channel because most people don't do that, about half. If you really do like my content and want to make sure you get more and you think I do a good job, please consider hitting that subscribe button, hit that like button. Let's read the first story. One of the more alarming bits of news that has come out of all of this so far, in my opinion, is a statement from Tom Cotton. And I mean this with no disrespect. Just the rhetoric has reached the level where he's now saying what's happening in Portland is basically like the attack on Fort Sumter. GOP lawmaker compares protesters to insurrectionists who started civil war. Now, The Hill, who's reporting this, I think is wrong to say protesters because they're using very dangerous explosives and they're attacking federal law enforcement. Let's read. Senator Tom Cotton, Republican from Arkansas, doubled down on his call for federal law enforcement officials to be sent to U.S. cities amid protests over racial inequality as he compared the demonstrators to the insurrectionists who started the Civil War and seceded from the United States. The federal government cannot allow anarchists and insurrectionists to destroy federal courthouses, federal buildings, or other federal property. These insurrectionists in the streets of Portland are little different from the insurrectionists who seceded from the Union in 1861 in South Carolina and tried to take over Fort Sumter, Cotton said Tuesday on Fox and Friends, referring to protests in Oregon. Just like President Lincoln wouldn't stand for that, the federal government today cannot stand for the vandalism, the firebombing, or any attacks on federal property. It is right to send federal law enforcement in to defend federal property and federal facilities. A couple of years ago, I had read an article about the likelihood of a second civil war in the United States. I believe it may have been the Atlantic or New York Mag or something. They had interviewed several national security experts and concluded that their opinions on whether or not a second civil war would occur was ranging from like 30 to 90%, but the average was still really high, like in the high 30s, like a 35% chance it happens. At the time when I talked about this, many people mocked me. Mostly not really. A lot of people think I'm kind of lukewarm in my opinions, but a lot of people keep telling me this. Oh my, Tim, stop saying civil war. It's not happening. It won't happen. Maybe this doesn't escalate. I don't know. But I've told you over the past several years that this would happen. Something like this would happen. And I don't think it's a profound prediction to say if someone comes out and cheers for extremist violence in the media, they'll do more of it. And in response, people will beg for federal law enforcement, which they're doing, and Trump is responding. I said that if Antifa keeps doing what they do, it will result in Trump sending out federal law enforcement and emboldening the right. And we are seeing that escalation. But I would like to now explain to you that you are a frog boiling in a pot. You get the reference? The reference is that you don't realize the water around you is getting hotter and hotter until it's too late and you've been boiled alive. And the best example is whether or not this is an embellishment from Robert Evans. The fact is that in Portland, we are seeing moms, dads, regular people not in black bloc joining the ranks, thousands of people trying to breach a courthouse. Moms and dads and black bloc and activists of all stripe tore open the doors of a federal courthouse and beat back the agents inside. A few years ago, when I first started talking about the possibility of a civil war, there weren't moms in the street joining Antifa. It was far leftists and right-wing groups fighting each other. It was Trump supporters being attacked by the far left, black-clad young people. Now what do we see? The supposed moms are on video right now trying to break the door down. They're being tear gassed and they're standing in between the federal law enforcement agents and the extremists who have been besieging this building for months. There it is. Regular citizens have joined the ranks of the extremists. And that's what this reporter from Bellingcat said, that when you engage liberals right, they might actually join you in wanting to take a sledgehammer to tear down federal courthouse doors. Where do you think we go from here? Do you think that these people, these regular moms, if they are actually regular moms, whatever, citizens of Portland, just stop caring? It's possible they walk away. But with the federal law enforcement engaging them, nobody wants to back down, then escalation seems likely. Now, I've shown you what the GOP lawmaker Tom Cotton said. What about Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House? Unidentified stormtroopers, unmarked cars, kidnapping protesters, and causing severe injuries in response to graffiti. These are not the actions of a democratic republic. DHS Gov's actions in Portland undermine its mission. Trump and his stormtroopers must be stopped. First Amendment speech should never be met with one-sided violence from federal agents acting as Trump's secret police, especially when unidentified. This is disgraceful behavior we would expect from a banana republic, not the government of the United States. You may have seen this. I've talked about this before, but I want to bring it all together in context. The Speaker of the House, who I believe is third in line for the presidency, is lying to you, saying that it's First Amendment activities and it's just graffiti. The first thing I showed you was a reporter from Bellingcat saying they tore down the doors of a federal courthouse and attacked the agents inside. Certainly, it's not what Nancy Pelosi is saying it is. Now, it may not be the invasion of Fort Sumter either. The fact is, a senator and the Speaker of the House, a Democrat, GOP and Democrat, are at odds, choosing which side is the good guy or the bad guy. It may end here. I don't know. But my personal opinion is escalation. You see, this goes back longer than just what's happening right now. It's been brewing for a long time. In America, talk turns to something not spoken of for 150 years, civil war. The Washington Post, March 2nd, 2019. They say, at a moment when the country has never seemed angrier, two political commentators from opposite sides of the divide concurred recently on one point that was nearly unthinkable. The country is on the verge of a civil war. That was over 1 year ago. Is it possible that in that 1 year we've actually entered a hot civil war? Could Portland, the breaching of the doors of the federal courthouse, be the shot heard round the world? I'm not entirely convinced. But there are photographs of federal law enforcement brandishing their sidearms. If we reach that point, and it's possible, that could be the shot heard round the world. They say, first came U.S. Attorney Joseph DeGenova, a Fox News regular and ally to Trump. We are in a civil war, he said. The suggestion that there's ever going to be civil discourse in this country for the foreseeable future is over. It's going to be total war. The next day, Nicole Wallace, a former Republican operative turned MSNBC contributor, agreed, but she said it was Trump. Although she placed the blame squarely on the president, that's what they say. And this is from August 4th, as we now move forward through the last year. Princeton professor, we are in a cold civil war, specifically referencing illegal immigration. Now we have Newsweek. This is from September 30th, 2019. Trump's civil war quote, is it actually grounds for impeachment, says Harvard law professor. If the Democrats are successful in removing the president from office, which they will never be, it will cause a civil war-like fracture in this nation from which our country will never heal, Trump tweeted on Sunday night. Maybe he was right, maybe he was wrong, I'm not sure. But we can see this from Lawfare, October 2nd, now moving another month up, 2019. Armed militias are taking Trump's civil war tweets seriously. Based on what I've read, I believe the answer, I believe this is 100% correct. And we've seen the Boogaloo boys, whatever you want to call them, people who believe a second civil war is imminent. Perhaps when the far left were able to breach a federal courthouse and beat back federal agents, and the Portland police were nowhere in sight, and the state of Oregon is lending state resources in defense of these individuals, and local residents have joined in the destruction of a federal courthouse, maybe it's become a hot civil war. Or maybe we are just about to cross that line. I can't tell you for sure, but I can show you some of the rhetoric we've seen so far. In a speech, Mike Pence said this, it's not so much whether America will be more conservative or more liberal, more Republican or Democrat, more red or blue. It's whether America remains America. It's whether we will leave to our children and our grandchildren a country grounded in our highest ideals of freedom, free markets, and the unalienable right of life and liberty, or whether we will leave to our children and grandchildren a country that is fundamentally transformed into something else. What is that something else? Well, Newsweek published this op-ed today. America is fast becoming a woke theocracy. Yes, maybe that's what this is really about. Woke insurrectionists, far left revolutionary types, they literally call it an uprising. They've never been shy about it, are emboldened. Their numbers are growing for whatever reason. They don't all agree with the same woke theocracy. But as more and more corporations and more government agencies bend the knee to intersectionalism, perhaps the result will be woke theocracy. Maybe that's what Mike Pence was saying. We will get. I wonder, man, when we hear this rhetoric that the election is about more than Democrat or Republican, it's about whether or not we will still have a country or something like it. I believe it. I believe it because I've heard from Donald Trump and from Joe Biden. Both have said that foreign influence will interfere in the election. Mail-in voting is devolved into chaos. Votes are not being counted properly. And the rise of the woke far left and the lies from people like Pelosi and other Democrats and the media leads me to believe there is nothing that can be done. I want to show you something. I talked about this in my earlier segment. You may have seen it, but for the main segment in context, I must show people. The edge of all-out war, reports Bellingcat. On July 4th, Portland's 39th consecutive night of protests, more than 1,000 people assembled in front of the Justice Center and federal courthouses downtown. They began launching dozens of commercial-grade fireworks into the concrete facades of both buildings, prompting a response from the police and federal agents inside both buildings. What followed resembled nothing so much as a medieval siege. He then says the whole situation prompted the first major federal response to Portland's nightly protests. That was it. After 39 consecutive nights of what he says are protests, I think when you lob commercial-grade fireworks at a building, and you can see here's a brief image of some of the explosion, it's not a protest. But what he does show is that it wasn't started by the federal agents. This is the far left. And that's why I lay the blame with the far left. You see, in Portland, quote, I am Antifa. Sarah Iannarone forces runoff in bid to become Portland's mayor. Voters in Portland, Oregon, will decide in November whether to elect an Antifa mayor, even after Trump vowed to declare Antifa a domestic terror organization. That's it. I am Antifa, she tweeted. I stand proudly beside the good people of this city, organizing in countless ways every day to oppose hate in its myriad of forms. Well, there you have it. The people in the streets of Portland are lobbing commercial-grade fireworks at the federal facility. According to the same reporter, breached the doors and attacked federal agents. And now, come November, the new potential mayor says, I am Antifa, and the president said that he was going to declare Antifa a domestic terror organization. So maybe it's not a civil war now. I don't know. As far as I can tell, as I stated earlier, in 50 years, of course, they'll say this was part of the Civil War, assuming the escalation continues. If tomorrow, for some reason, everything stopped, I don't know why it would. I don't see evidence to believe it would, or to suggest it would. Then, of course, they would say there was no Civil War, it never happened. But this is more than enough to say it is, at least as far as I'm concerned, historically, or future historically, assuming we get worse. For the mayor of Portland to say, I am Antifa, for the president to say Antifa are terrorists, for Pelosi to say federal law enforcement are stormtroopers, for Tom Cotton, a senator for the Republican Party, to say that these are to liken this group like the insurrectionists of the Confederacy who attacked Fort Sumter. It sounds like from the highest levels all the way down, it's primed. The mayor of Portland says she stands beside these individuals who have been laying siege to the federal courthouse. What happens when she becomes a government official in Portland? You can go ahead and just make whatever assumption you want. That's fine. I'm going to tell you right now, the president is going to label them terrorist groups. What happens when a terrorist gets elected to mayor of Portland? Are they going to stop attacking the federal buildings? I don't think so. The reason I highlighted the Bellingcat story about the explosives is so that you know, okay, this reporter is on the ground telling us what's happening, and they're sympathetic. But you can take that as close to our understanding of what's really going on as possible. I'm not down there, so maybe it's not correct, but Bellingcat is not some random leftist activist. They're a well-known security and conflict reporting group. What they're telling us is that the media has been lying to us the whole time. In fact, this reporter even brings it up when many people tried pushing the narrative that the police burned down their own union building or set a fire inside of it. He said, no, it was a deliberate and intelligently acted out activist action to burn the Portland Police Association. It generated a ton of attention for their cause. It worked. They're telling us straight up, they are doing this. So when you see peaceful protester in the media, when you see Nancy Pelosi say graffiti, they're lying to you. Why? Perhaps they want power. Perhaps they think this group will win. Perhaps they think when that happens, they'll be spared. I don't know. I don't see that as being the case. I do know that Trump will deploy more federal agents around the country. Donald Trump orders 150 federal agents into Chicago, despite city's mayor Lori Lightfoot rejecting unconstitutional conduct and mounting outcry over secret police tactics in Portland. There's the escalation. Trump is going to do what people wanted him to do. But I think it goes beyond this. I think Donald Trump will take a rather Lincoln-esque approach. He doesn't care what the states will end up saying. He's going to send in the federal law enforcement and say the federal courthouses will not be assaulted. They will be defended. So what is he going to do with these federal agents? They're going to be protecting, my understanding, federal property, courthouses or otherwise. They're not going to be patrolling the streets. That's a lie. In Portland, when they're walking through the streets, it's because they're clearing out the attacks on the federal courthouse. It was an offensive maneuver, one of the very few they actually engaged in, considering we're on day 54, night 54 of riots, and the federal action didn't begin until after July 4th. Rather incredible, I would add. Well, here's the New York Times. Trump's occupation of American cities has begun. Protesters are being snatched from the streets without warrants. Can we call it fascism yet? How do we end up with two overt factions? Well, I'm seeing high-profile individuals I know claim that Trump's secret police are snatching people off the streets. It's a half-truth. The DHS is detaining people briefly, about an hour and a half, to question them. They apparently were read their Miranda rights, though some people are saying they're not being read their rights, and they don't need to be read their rights. These people have no idea what they're talking about. But when the New York Times runs an op-ed saying that Trump's, police are snatching up people without warrants, can we call it fascism yet? This will rile up many people who don't read the news, who will then blindly support the lies from the media and from people like Pelosi. I'm not saying the policies of the Republicans are good. I'm saying that, and I'm not even agreeing with Tom Cotton when he says it's like Fort Sumter. It may be a bit over the top, I don't know. But I will tell you this. The riots are happening. The far left is emboldened. They've been calling it uprising, insurrection, revolution. They have been saying it. They're not shy. They're not hiding it. The left is lying. They're saying it's just Trump. He's doing all of it. I wonder why. I can't tell you, man. But I can tell you one of the responses to Tom Cotton has been ridicule. That's how they keep everyone in line in this way. When Tom Cotton says they're just like the Confederate insurrectionists, Civil War 2.0, writes the Daily Beast. These insurrectionists in the streets of Portland are little different from the insurrectionists who tried to take over Fort Sumter. What do we hear? Well, according to Daily Beast, mockery. Breaking, Senator Tom Cotton advocates building statues, renaming military bases to honor Portland protesters. Washington Post columnist Paul Waldman joked. That's what it is. So when he says this, your media won't tell you, your institution of journalism won't tell you what's really going on. The New York Times will say it's fascism. It's Trump's fault. They won't tell you why Tom Cotton is saying it's like the attack on Fort Sumter. They'll make jokes that if he likes the Confederates so much, then surely he'll want Antifa statues too. And then then regular liberals in this country who don't watch the news, who don't watch videos like this, will simply say, ha ha ha, it's all a big joke. It's not really happening. But Orange Man is bad. Well, the New York Times told us, right? The New York Times said Trump's occupying American cities. Never mind, the feds have the right to occupy their own buildings, and the federal government literally is our federal government. What's the goal of all of this? Let me wrap it up very, very neatly for you. Civil war. Two words a lot of people reject. When the mainstream media, the New York Times, the Washington Post, when people like Nancy Pelosi mock the idea that the federal government has a right to their jurisdiction across this country, and they call federal law enforcement protecting their own buildings occupation. Do you know what the narrative they're pushing out is? That the federal government doesn't have a right to be in their own federal jurisdiction. They are telling you the feds do not have jurisdiction in the states. What does that sound like? Many states going up against the federal government? I didn't think civil war would become something like this. I thought it would be random. The way I described it a couple years ago was that you'll see insurgency in various cities. Well, of course, that's literally what's happening now in Portland. I guess I called that one. But I didn't think we were actually going to see states literally claim that the feds had no jurisdiction anymore, like we did in the first Civil War. But that's what this message is. Portland, their attorney general, has filed a lawsuit against Trump. It will not stop here, at least in my opinion. It may. I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers. I could be wrong. But in my view, many more states will follow suit in various ways. I can just tell you, man. Chicago mayor warns Trump against using secret federal agents. Secret? They're DHS police. It's CBP. It's Federal Protective Services. It's the marshals. They wear the patches. They're allowed to be in these buildings protecting them. What's next? We'll have Illinois and Oregon both say the federal government has no right to be here. Oregon has already filed suit. I hope you all realize that in the first American Civil War, The South didn't just snap their fingers and say, we've all decided to secede from the Union at the exact same time. It was actually timed differently. I believe initially it was 7 states. I'm not entirely sure. I'll have to brush up on my history. But my understanding is the initial secession was about 7 states, and then many other states started to break away. In fact, Virginia split in half. So it's not going to be so simple. There's been talk about Eastern Oregon breaking off and joining Greater Idaho, they call it, or the state of Jefferson. Yeah, we could be close to this. Right now, Oregon is suing the federal government saying, get your agents out of here. And they're saying no. Trump is saying no, he'll send more. Chicago is now saying we don't want them here either, but they have jurisdiction there. So what happens next? Well, I'll show you an image. It's probably going to get me in trouble on YouTube, but we'll roll with it anyway. I'll show you this. What appears to be a U.S. Marshal holding a sidearm, pointing it in the direction of the protesters on the steps of the federal courthouse. And many people are asking, is that live ammunition? Maybe. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see how this plays out. But like I explained to you, right now, we are seeing states argue that the feds have no right to be in those states. That's just not true. And that's how the first Civil War basically started. So what are we in now? You tell me. I'll see you all at 6 p.m. over at youtube.com/TimCastNews. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you there.